The ink actually touched the paper. I felt the cold metal nib press down, felt the first fraction of a line begin to form under my own hand, my name, my home, everything Walter and I had built, about to disappear into a single stroke of ink. And then I saw 4 words, written in handwriting I would know anywhere, on a page I had not opened in 6 years. 4 words my husband had left for me long before he ever imagined I would need them. Never make permanent decisions on temporary fear. That sentence stopped my hand less than a second before it was too late. This is the story of the night I almost signed my home away, and the strange, complicated, unfinished way my family found its way back to itself afterward. It does not end the way you think it will. I am not sure, even now, that it has fully ended at all. My name does not matter much in this story. You can call me Grace, if you like. It is not the name my mother gave me, but it is the name that fits who I became. I was 26 when I married my husband, Walter. We did not have money then. We had a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and most nights we ate rice and whatever vegetables were on sale. But we had something else. We had a plan, and we had a habit Walter never gave up his whole life. He wrote everything down. Every worry, every hope, every small argument we ever settled, he put into a small leather diary he kept in his coat pocket. I used to tease him about it. "You'll run out of pages before you run out of thoughts," I told him once. He just smiled and kept writing. Walter had a saying he repeated so often over the years that Daniel and Claire used to roll their eyes whenever he started it. Whenever one of us panicked about money, or a leaking roof, or a tenant who had not paid rent in months, he would take my hand and say the same quiet sentence: "Never make permanent decisions on temporary fear." I did not know, back then, how many times I would need to remember those words long after his voice had gone silent. Together, we started buying small pieces of property. Nothing grand at first. A tiny 2-bedroom house that needed new pipes. A little shop space near the train station. We worked hard, and we were careful. And slowly, over almost 40 years, what started as nothing became something. By the time Walter turned 60, we owned a small collection of buildings across the city. And at the center of it all, the place we called home, a penthouse on the 18th floor, with wide windows that looked out over the water. People sometimes hear the number and their eyes grow wide. $7.7 million. But to me, it was never a number. It was the home where our children took their first steps. It was the kitchen where I taught my daughter to bake bread. And it was the living room where, every year on our anniversary, Walter would put on the same worn record, an old Nat King Cole tune, the one that always made him hum slightly off-key, and pull me close for one slow, clumsy dance before dinner. 40 years, and he never learned to lead properly. I never told him that was the part I loved most. He had promised me, back when we owned nothing but a leaking 2-bedroom house, that we would dance to that same silly song no matter how far we ever climbed. He kept that promise for 40 years, right up until the week before he died. We raised 2 children in that home. My son, Daniel, was the responsible one, always trying to make everyone proud. My daughter, Claire, was the dreamer, the one who asked 100 questions before breakfast, the one who later grew up to become a financial analyst, sharp, with numbers in a way that would matter more than any of us knew, though not yet, not in this part of the story. Daniel married a woman named Vivian when he was 31. She was polished and confident and always knew exactly what she wanted. At first, I admired that about her. I did not yet understand how much of that confidence was built over a very deep, very private fear. Walter passed away 6 years ago. A heart attack, sudden, on an ordinary Tuesday morning. One moment he was buttering his toast and telling me about a dream he'd had. The next moment he was gone. For the first year after, I moved through my days like a ghost in my own life. I would wake some mornings and reach across the bed the way I had for almost 40 years, my hand finding only cool sheets. I still made 2 cups of tea some mornings, out of habit, before I remembered. Grief does strange, small things like that. But I did not fall apart. I still ran our small property business with the help of a lawyer, Walter, and I had trusted for over 20 years, a careful man named Mr. Acaffer. I still made my own decisions. I still knew my own mind. That, it turned out, was the part my family found most difficult to accept. At the time, I thought that was the hardest part of grief already behind me. I had no idea what was still coming. I kept Walter's diaries on a shelf in the study, a small row of leather-bound books spanning nearly 30 years, and for a long time after he died, I could not bring myself to open a single one. I told myself I would read them eventually, when the grief settled into something I could hold without breaking. What I did not know then was that one of those unopened books would matter far more than I could have imagined years later, on a night I was not yet able to picture. There was one strange, strange, small moment during that first year of grief I have never fully explained to anyone. Sorting through Walter's desk drawers one afternoon, I found Mr. Ockhaffer's business card tucked into a side pocket, far more worn than it should have been for a man we only called once or twice a year. I remember holding it for a long moment, some quiet instinct telling me to call him, just to ask if there was anything I ought to know. I set the card back down instead, telling myself grief was making me imagine complications that did not exist. I would think of that card again, much later, and wonder how differently things might have gone if I had simply picked up the phone that day. My friends from the building would check on me often in those early months. Mrs. Alvarez from the 14th floor would leave soup outside my door some evenings, never staying long enough for me to feel obligated to talk. My neighbor Thomas, a retired school teacher, would knock on Sunday afternoons just to sit with me for an hour, saying nothing at all, simply keeping me company while I stared out at the water. Looking back, I think these small kindnesses from people outside my own family were what kept me steady during a time when I could have easily drifted away entirely. It started small, the way these things usually do. It was never one big moment. It was 100 tiny ones stacked quietly on top of each other until I looked up one day and realized the ground beneath me had shifted. About a year after Walter passed, Daniel and Vivian started coming over for dinner more often. At first, I welcomed it, but the conversations began to change. "Mom," Daniel said one evening, twisting his napkin in his hands, "have you thought about what happens to all of this? The buildings, the penthouse. It's a lot for you to manage on your own." "I'm not on my own," I told him. "I have Mr. Ockhaffer. I have been running this business since before you could talk, Daniel." Vivian smiled the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. "We're not saying you can't handle it, Grace. We just think, at your age, it might be wise to simplify things." The comments did not stop. Daniel began bringing pamphlets to dinner, glossy brochures for retirement communities with names like Golden Meadow and Serenity Gardens. Vivian began referring to the penthouse not as your home, but as the asset. There was a Sunday, not long before all of this came to a head, when my granddaughter, little Mia, was visiting with Daniel and Vivian. She was only 7 at the time, all gap-toothed smiles and endless questions. Mia wandered into the study while the adults talked in the kitchen, and I found her sitting on the floor, flipping through one of Walter's old photo albums. "Grandma," she said, looking up at me, "is this really going to be my house one day?" I sat down beside her on the floor, my knees complaining the way they always did by then, and asked why she would say such a thing. "Mommy said we're going to fix it up really nice once it's ours," she said simply, the way children repeat things without understanding the weight behind them. My hand tightened around the edge of the photo album, the leather creaking faintly under my fingers. I smiled for Mia's sake and told her that this would always be a home filled with love for her, no matter who lived there. But my pulse did not slow down for the rest of that afternoon. One afternoon, I came home from my morning walk and found the front door already unlocked. My chest went tight before I even stepped inside. Daniel had given Vivian a key for emergencies, and I had not thought much of it until that moment. I found her in the master bedroom, phone raised, taking photographs of the closet, the window, the built-in shelving. "Vivian, what are you doing?" she startled, the phone slipping slightly in her hand before she caught it. "Oh, Grace, I didn't hear you come in. Daniel wanted some photos for insurance purposes." I did not believe her. I have never fully known what those photographs were for, though I have my suspicions now. I simply nodded, my jaw tight, and asked her to please call before letting herself in from now on. After she left, I stood alone in that bedroom for a long time, my arms wrapped around myself, staring at the closet she had photographed as though it already belonged to someone else. There was one evening, though, that I did not fully understand until much later, when I found Vivian alone on the balcony after dinner, staring out at the water with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She did not hear me come out. Her shoulders were shaking, just slightly, and when she turned and saw me, she quickly wiped at her face and tried to laugh it off. "Sorry, Grace. Allergies, I think." I did not push her that night, but I noticed the small notebook she had left open on the counter earlier. Rows of numbers written in tight, anxious handwriting, some of them circled twice, one column labeled simply, "If the restaurant closes." I did not understand what it meant then. I only knew it was the first time I had seen something in Vivian that looked less like ambition and more like fear. No businesslike in a way I had never heard her use with me. "No, the square footage is closer to 3,000, she was saying. "I can send you photos this week if that helps with the preliminary number." She hung up quickly when she saw me standing in the doorway, her smile snapping back into place a half-second too late. When I asked who she had been speaking with, she told me it was just a friend in real estate, out of curiosity. I did not believe her, and for the first time since learning about the restaurant, the sympathy in my chest curdled into something closer to anger. Fear, I reminded myself myself standing there in my own kitchen does not excuse going behind someone's back. I found myself standing in front of Walter's diary shelf again that same evening, my fingers resting on the spine of the very book I would not actually open for weeks yet. I told myself there was nothing in there but old grief, nothing that could help me with a problem happening in the present. I took my hand away and went to bed instead. I think of that moment often now, how close I came to opening it so much sooner than I did. Claire, my daughter, called me not long after. Her voice was tight with worry. "Mom, has Vivian said anything to you about the will, about the penthouse?" I told her about the conversation on the balcony, about the notebook, about the restaurant. Claire went quiet for a long moment. "Mom, that explains a lot, but it doesn't make it okay. Desperate people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. That doesn't mean you owe them your home." She paused. "Let me look into the restaurant's finances. I have contacts who can pull public filings. I want to understand exactly how bad this is before you make any decisions." I did not fully realize in that moment how important that phone call would become. Claire did not stop at phone calls. 2 weeks after our conversation, she called me again, this time her voice tight and fast in a way I had never heard from her before. "Mom, I need you to sit down." I sat. "I pulled the county property records this afternoon just to understand the restaurant's debt situation better. Mom, there's a preliminary listing draft for the penthouse. Photos, square footage, an estimated sale price. It's not public yet. It's sitting in a real estate agent's private system, but a colleague of mine has access through her brokerage. Someone requested it 3 weeks ago, before the anniversary dinner, before the folder was ever put on your table." My hand went cold around the phone. 3 weeks. That meant the plan had already been moving forward, quietly, long before anyone had asked my permission for anything at all. The pamphlets, the dinners, even Vivian's tearful confession on my balcony. All of it happening alongside a listing draft with photographs of my own bedroom closet already circulating somewhere I could not see. I thought of Vivian's phone call in my kitchen, the words square footage and photos this week, and I understood with a sick, sinking clarity exactly what they had been for. "Does Daniel know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know." I did not simply sit with that news either. The next morning, I found the name of the brokerage Claire had mentioned, and I called them myself, giving my own name plainly as the owner of record. The young man on the phone hesitated, clearly unsure how to handle a call from the very homeowner whose property he had priced without her knowledge. "I can't discuss an active client request, ma'am," he said carefully, "but I can confirm there is a file under that address." I thanked him, hung up, and sat with the confirmation for a long moment, not shaken this time, but strangely calm, the way a person feels once a suspicion finally becomes a fact they can act on instead of merely fear. Claire did not stop there. Over the following 2 weeks, she called me almost every evening, sometimes just to talk about ordinary things, her work, a new recipe she was trying, a movie she had seen, but always, near the end of the call, she would circle back gently. "Have they said anything else? Has anyone asked you to sign anything yet?" I found myself grateful for her persistence in a way I had not expected. For years, Claire and I had drifted into the easy distance that sometimes grows between a mother and a daughter who love each other, but do not always know how to say so directly. This slow, careful checking in became its own kind of repair, even before either of us named it that way. I drove to their house myself the day after Claire's call, something I had not done without an invitation in a very long time. I did not go inside. Standing on their front step, I saw it through the narrow gap of their mail slot before I even knocked, a folded notice, official looking, the words "Notice of Default" visible along the top edge. Behind it, through the living room window, I could see the beginnings of moving boxes stacked along one wall, half-packed, as though they had already quietly begun preparing to lose the only other home they had. I confronted Vivian directly that afternoon, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. "You listed my home before you ever asked me, before the folder was even on the table." Her face went through several things at once, panic, then something like relief that the secret was finally out, then, last of all, shame. "I was terrified, Grace. I told myself getting the paperwork ready early wasn't the same as deciding. I told myself I could stop at any time before you actually agreed to anything." Her voice cracked. "That was a lie I told myself to make it feel less wrong. I know that now. It was wrong," I told her plainly, refusing to let the softness in her voice pull the sharp edges off what she had done. "Being afraid does not give you the right to go behind my back in my own home. I need you to understand that, Vivian, separate from whatever sympathy I have for how you got here." She did not argue with me. She simply nodded, tears sliding silently down her face, and for the first time, I saw her let the shame sit on her without trying to explain it away. I almost left then, but as I turned to go, I caught sight of Daniel through the half-open door of his home office. He did not know I was standing there. He was seated at his desk, a small stack of the same transfer papers spread in front of him, his pen resting motionless in his hand, and beside the papers, propped against a lamp, was a framed photograph of Walter from years ago, laughing at something just out of frame. Daniel was not looking at the documents. He was looking at his father's face, his jaw tight, his pen never once touching the page. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, watching my son fail, quietly and privately, to make himself sign something he did not fully believe in. I did not say anything. I let myself out without him ever knowing I had seen it. I have never told him until now that I did. Seen Daniel sitting alone in his car outside Grace's building, hands on the steering wheel, not moving. There was one more moment in this part of the story I did not learn about until later, and I include it here because I think it belongs here, even though I was not there to see it happen. Daniel told me about it himself, much later, in a quieter conversation. He said he used to sit in his car outside my building sometimes, before coming up, gathering the courage to walk through the door. Some evenings, he told me, he drove past the restaurant first, parking across the street just to look at it through the darkened front windows, the chairs stacked upside down on empty tables, the neon sign unlit, a business he had poured 6 years of his life into now sitting silent most nights of the week. He said some nights he sat there for 20 minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went pale, thinking about the second mortgage they had taken out on their own small house to cover the restaurant's debts. He said it was easier to let Vivian carry the conversation about the penthouse than to admit out loud that he had failed to build the kind of security he had always promised himself he would give his family. Shame, it turns out, can make a person go quiet in exactly the moments they most need to speak. He never told me any of this while it was happening. I only learned it after everything else had already come apart. Looking back now, I think that week was my last real chance to stop what came next quietly, before it ever reached a dinner table. I let it pass. The 6th anniversary of Walter's death fell on a Thursday. That year, Daniel and Vivian asked to join me. I made a bigger dinner than usual. I set out Walter's good plates. We ate dinner in near silence. It was after dinner, once the plates were cleared, that Vivian set a leather folder on the table between us. "Grace," she said gently, "we need to talk to you about something important." Inside were papers, a transfer of ownership, moving the penthouse into a family trust managed by Daniel and Vivian. "And if I don't sign?" I asked quietly, my fingers curling tight around the edge of the tablecloth beneath the table, out of sight. Vivian's composure slipped for just a moment, something raw and frightened showing through the practiced calm. "Grace, the bank needs an answer by Friday. If we can't show proof of additional assets by then, the restaurant's line of credit gets pulled. And there's a foreclosure hearing on our house scheduled for Monday morning. If we can't stop it before then, we lose everything, the business, the house, all of it in the same week. I know this isn't fair to put on you like this. I know, but we don't have the luxury of slow anymore. 4 days for the bank, 6 for the house. That was all the time they were giving me to decide the rest of my life. Grace, we're only trying to help," she continued, and this time I heard something new underneath her voice, something closer to pleading than pressure. "You're not getting any younger. We're trying to protect this family. Please." I told them I needed time, that I would not sign anything without my own lawyer reviewing it first. Daniel reached across the table and touched my hand. His fingers were cold. "Please, Mom, just think about it. We're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to make sure nothing ever gets taken from us, as a family, by lawyers or taxes or bad luck." I looked down at his hand over mine, then at Vivian, whose knuckles had gone white around her water glass. "I need time," I repeated, my voice steadier than my hands. "I will read everything carefully, and I will give you an answer when I am ready, and not one moment before." Vivian's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Grace. Take all the time you need." But something in her tone told me that all the time was expected to be very little time indeed. They left a little after 9 that evening. I stood at the door and watched the elevator close behind them, my hand still resting on the frame long after the hallway had gone quiet. I did not simply sit and wait after that. Before I allowed myself to fully read those papers, I drove to a small 24-hour copy shop near the pharmacy and made duplicates of every single page, watching each one slide out warm from the machine, and mailed the originals, not the copies, to Mr. Ockhaffer's office the very next morning, so that no version of that folder would ever exist solely in my own apartment, where it could quietly disappear or be quietly replaced. It was a small, stubborn act, and I am not sure, even now, what exactly I thought I was protecting myself from, but it felt, for the first time in weeks, like a decision that belonged entirely to me. I want to tell you honestly what happened over the next 3 days, because it is the part of this story I am least proud of, and also the part I think matters most. Vivian called every day, sometimes twice. Her voice was softer each time, more worn down, and somewhere in the middle of those calls, I stopped hearing a woman trying to manipulate me and started hearing a woman who was genuinely, quietly drowning. On the second day, she called just after 7 in the evening, and I could hear something in the background, a child crying, maybe Mia, and Vivian's voice cracking stung slightly as she tried to keep her tone light for my sake. Sorry, Grace, it's a bit chaotic here. Everything's fine, really. I did not believe her, and I think, somewhere underneath, she knew I did not. I thought about the notebook on the counter. I thought about the moving truck she had described, and the sound of it pulling away when she was 14 years old. I thought about my own grandchildren, and what it would mean for them to watch their parents lose everything the way Vivian once had. Each night, the thought grew a little heavier, a little harder to set down before sleep, until by the second night I had stopped sleeping at all, lying awake instead and staring at the ceiling, running the same argument in circles until it wore smooth from repetition. By the third night, Friday was less than 48 hours away, and exhaustion had worn a hole straight through my resolve. I made myself a cup of tea I did not drink, letting it go cold on the counter the way I so often did those days, and sat alone at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, the folder open in front of me, a pen. My hand was not steady. I remember watching it tremble slightly over the signature line, my knuckles pale in the lamplight, and thinking, simply, that signing this paper might be the only way left to save my son from himself. I told myself it did not matter what the penthouse meant to me anymore. Not really. Not if it meant Daniel losing his home too. My breath had gone shallow, and somewhere in my chest a tight, cold knot had settled that would not loosen no matter how many times I told myself this was the right thing to do. I lowered the pen toward the page, the tip nearly touching paper, and then my eyes caught the small stack of Walter's old diaries on the shelf behind the table, where I kept them out of habit, never quite ready to read them again. I do not know what made me stand up in that exact moment, my legs unsteady beneath me, the pen still loose in my fingers. Perhaps it was simply the need to delay the pen for one more minute. I ran my fingers along the worn spines until I found the one from the year of his health scare, 11 years ago, and let it fall open somewhere near the middle, the pages soft and slightly curled from age. There, in his familiar, slanted handwriting, underlined twice hard enough to nearly tear the page, was a sentence I had heard him say out loud so many times over the years that I had stopped truly hearing it at all. Never make permanent decisions on temporary fear. Beneath it, in smaller writing, he had continued, made the arrangement with Ackhafer today, told him, protect her, not control her. She does not know yet, and I hope she never needs to. But if the day ever comes when someone she loves asks her to give away more than she should, I want there to be a wall already built, quietly, so she never has to build it herself in a moment of grief. My hands were shaking now for an entirely different reason. I sat back down slowly, the pen still resting loose against my palm, and I read that page perhaps a dozen times, my thumb tracing the indent of his handwriting on the paper, as though I could feel him through it. Somewhere in the reading, the tight knot in my chest finally loosened, just slightly enough for me to breathe properly again. I did not yet fully understand what he had meant by the arrangement, but I understood clearly that my husband had left me something years before this moment, and I owed it to him and to myself to find out what it was before I gave anything away. I closed the folder without signing it, set the pen down beside the diary, and sat there in the quiet kitchen until the sky outside began to turn from black to gray. The next morning, I called Mr. Ackhafer and told him everything. Grace, he said, after a long pause, do you remember the arrangement you and Walter made 11 years ago, before he passed? I did remember, vaguely, though the details had grown soft with time. We need to talk in person, he said. Today, if you can manage it. 11 years earlier, after a health scare Walter had, we had placed the penthouse into an irrevocable family trust, not controlled by our children, but requiring the unanimous agreement of 3 named parties. Myself, Mr. Ackhafer, and a representative from a small charitable foundation Walter had grown fond of. We had done it quietly, without telling Daniel or Claire, because Walter had said something to me then that I had not fully understood until years later. People change when they see a number that big, he had said. Even good people. I don't want money to be the reason our children stop loving each other or stop loving their mother. At the time, I had thought he was being overly cautious. Sitting in that office now, holding proof of what he had quietly built, I understood. There is something else you should know, Mr. Ackhafer said carefully, and I felt the relief in my chest tighten again into something more uncertain. The foundation's current representative is a man named Mr. Reyes. He has only held the position for 2 years. The previous representative retired last spring. He does not know your family the way the original foundation contact did. I received a call from him yesterday, Grace. Someone had already reached out to him directly before you and I even spoke. My stomach dropped. Vivian, I believe so. She presented him with a fairly compelling case. A struggling family business. Grandchildren's futures. Mr. Reyes did not say no to her outright. He asked for time to consider it. I sat in that office, staring at the old document that was supposed to have settled this question years before I ever needed it, and understood with a strange, sinking clarity that the wall Walter had built might not hold on its own after all. A new person stood at its center now, someone who had never known Walter, who owed his loyalty to the mission of the foundation rather than to any promise made to our family. Someone still had to defend it. The next morning changed everything, though not in the direction any of us expected. Claire came with me to meet Mr. Reyes. She had spent the previous 2 days pulling every public filing she could find on Daniel's restaurant, and she laid the numbers out plainly on his desk. Not to shame her brother, she said, but so that no decision in that room would be made on guesswork or persuasion alone. Mr. Reyes, Claire said, her voice steady in a way I found myself grateful for. My sister-in-law came to you with real numbers about real hardship. I'm not here to dispute that the hardship is real. I'm here to make sure whatever you decide is based on the full picture, not just the most urgent one. She slid a folder of her own across his desk. Bank statements, restaurant filings, the second mortgage documents she had tracked down through her own contacts. Mr. Reyes listened carefully, his eyes moving slowly over the pages. He admitted, quietly, that Vivian's visit had moved him, that he had sat with her story for 2 sleepless nights, uncertain whether the rigid letter of an old trust should outweigh a family's very real suffering. I am not an unfeeling man, he said, folding his hands on the desk. I did not want to be the reason a business failed or a family lost their home, simply because of paperwork written over a decade ago by 2 people I never had the chance to meet. Then don't make it about the paperwork, I told him, my hands folded tightly in my lap, steadier now than they had been 3 nights earlier at that kitchen table. My husband did not write this trust to protect a piece of paper. He wrote it to protect me from exactly this moment, a moment where fear is being used to move a decision faster than trust or honesty ever could. I am not refusing to help my son. I am refusing to be pressured into helping him in a way that costs me the one thing he has no right to take, and that his father specifically built a wall to prevent. Mr. Reyes was quiet for a long time, turning a pen slowly between his fingers. May I ask you something, Grace? If the trust did not exist, if there were no wall, as you call it, what would you have done? I thought about the pen trembling over the signature line 3 nights earlier, the cold knot in my chest, how close I had come to giving everything away out of love and exhaustion alone. I don't know, I told him honestly. That is exactly why my husband did not want me to have to find out. I paused, and the words came to me the way they always did now, steady and familiar. He used to tell me, never make permanent decisions on temporary fear. This trust was the only way he knew how to make sure I kept that promise, even on the nights I forgot to make it myself. Mr. Reyes was quiet for a long time. In the end, he did not release the trust, but he told me something before we left that stayed with me. For what it's worth, Grace, I believe your husband knew exactly what kind of moment he was protecting you from. I am sorry I nearly became part of the pressure, instead of the wall he intended me to be. He walked us to the door himself, and shook my hand a little longer than necessary, as though the gesture could somehow make up for the 2 sleepless nights he had spent weighing my home against a stranger's grief. Claire did not say much on the drive home. She kept both hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the road, and it was not until we were parked outside my building that she finally spoke. I was so afraid he was going to side with her, Mom. The numbers she gave him were real. I could see it in his face. He wanted to help. She let out a long breath. I think that's what scared me most. Not that Vivian lied. That everything she said was true, and it almost worked anyway. That Friday evening, the same Friday the bank had demanded its answer by, I asked all 3 of them to come to the Penthouse together for the first time since the anniversary dinner. I did not tell them why. I set 4 things on the table before anyone sat down. Walter's diary, open to the page with his handwriting. The listing draft Claire had found. Photographs of my own closet printed in full color. A copy of the trust document, freshly stamped by Mr. Ockeffer. And though I did not yet know its full significance, the sealed envelope with Daniel's name on it, which Mr. Ockeffer had given me only that morning. I know about the listing, I said, before anyone could speak, looking directly at Vivian. I know it was drawn up 3 weeks before you ever showed me that folder. I know about the phone call in my kitchen. And I know, Vivian, exactly what you meant when you said when we renovate and caught yourself. Vivian's face went white, and beside her, I watched Daniel's head turn slowly toward his wife, something breaking open in his expression as he understood, for the first time, how far ahead of him this had all gone. You knew, he asked her quietly. You already had it listed. Vivian did not answer him. She put both hands over her face instead, her shoulders shaking, and for a long moment the only sound in the room was her crying and the soft hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I was so scared, Daniel. I was so scared, and I didn't know how to say it out loud, so I just started moving, and once I started I didn't know how to stop. She looked up at me, her eyes red. I am so sorry, Grace. Not sorry that I got caught. Sorry that I let fear turn me into someone who would do this to you at all. Claire reached into her own folder then and slid one more page across the table, her voice quieter than I had heard it all evening. There's something else, Daniel. I found this the same day I found the listing, and I didn't know how to tell you. It was an application for a private bridge loan against future inheritance, filed with a small lending firm 2 months earlier. Daniel's signature at the bottom in ink that did not quite match the rest of his handwriting anywhere else in the file. Daniel stared at it, his face draining of color for a second time that evening. I never signed this, he said quietly, then looked up at his wife. Vivian, I never signed this. The room went very still. Vivian's crying stopped as abruptly as if someone had turned off a switch, replaced by a stillness far more frightening than the tears had been. I was going to tell you once it came through, she said, so quietly I almost did not hear her. I thought if the money arrived before you ever had to know how it got there, it wouldn't matter anymore. I told myself that was still protecting you. Daniel did not say anything for a long time. I watched something in my son close, quietly and completely, in a way I do not think any of us in that room fully understood the size of yet. I slid the diary across the table, turning it so Daniel could read the page himself. Your father wrote this 11 years ago. He knew this day might come before any of us did. Then I set the sealed envelope in front of him. And Mr. Ockhafer tells me this was delivered to you the same week. You signed for it yourself. Daniel stared at his own name on the envelope for a long moment before he reached for it. His hand, as badly as mine, had 3 nights earlier over that same pen. None of us knew, sitting around that table, that the hardest conversation of the night was still the one waiting between husband and wife, long after the rest of us had gone quiet. He came back to see me alone the following week, without calling first, which he had not done in years. He sat down across from me at the same table where I had nearly signed the folder days earlier, though he did not know that yet. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it without stopping me. I nodded, and he told me everything. The restaurant, the second mortgage, the nights sitting outside my building unable to come inside, the shame that had made it easier to let Vivian speak for both of them than to admit out loud that he had failed. His voice broke somewhere in the middle, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my son cried in front of me, the way he had not since he was a small boy with a broken bird's nest and no way to fix it. I let her push you because I couldn't face pushing myself. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have come to you honestly, months ago, and just asked for help instead of letting this become about the penthouse at all. I reached across the table and took his hand, the way I used to when he was small enough to still want it. You could have asked me from the beginning, Daniel. All of it, even the parts that felt too shameful to say out loud. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, the way he used to as a boy, too proud to admit he needed a tissue. I kept thinking if I just held on a little longer, I could fix it myself before anyone had to know. I didn't want you to see me fail at the one thing Dad always made look so easy. He was quiet for a moment, staring down at his hands. Do you know I still have his last voicemail on my phone? I've had 3 new phones since he died, and every time, the first thing I do is transfer it over before anything else. I listen to it sometimes in the car, outside the restaurant, when I can't make myself go inside. It's nothing important, just him asking if I wanted to come by for dinner that Sunday. But I keep thinking, if I'd picked up the actual call instead of letting it go to voicemail, maybe I'd have told him then how scared I already was about money, and none of this would have happened the way it did. His voice broke on the last few words, and for a moment he simply sat there, listening to something only he could hear. Your father failed plenty of times, I told him. He simply never let shame stop him from asking for help when he needed it. That was never weakness, Daniel. It was the thing that made everything else possible. In the weeks that followed, Claire helped me structure something different, not a transfer of the penthouse, but a proper, documented loan to Daniel's restaurant, drawn from the income the properties already generated, with clear terms that protected both of us. She spent 2 full weekends at my kitchen table, laptop open, walking me through repayment schedules and interest rates in language simple enough that I never once felt talked down to. I want this to actually help him, she said one evening, rubbing her tired eyes, not just make us all feel better for a month before it falls apart again. It was not a rescue built on panic. It was a plan built on numbers and honesty, and a daughter who finally had the chance to be as useful to this family as she had always wanted to be. Vivian and I sat together once more before that chapter closed, and this time neither of us reached for a folder. I'm sorry, she said simply. I told myself I was protecting my children, but somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether what I was doing to you was right, as long as it might work. I did not tell her I forgave her completely. completely, because I was not certain yet that I did. But I told her I understood, and for that day, it was enough. I did not ask her about the forged loan application that day. That conversation belonged to her and Daniel, not to me. And the last I heard, they had begun seeing a counselor together, quietly, to work out whether trust like that can be rebuilt at all, or only carefully managed around. There is one more thing I have to tell you, because I promised myself, when I began sharing this story, that I would not smooth over the parts that still ache. I want to go back for a moment to that Friday evening at the dining table, to the sealed envelope Daniel opened with shaking hands in front of all of us. Mr. Ackheffer confirmed it had been delivered and signed for 11 years earlier, when Daniel was 28, the same week the trust was created. Inside, in Walter's familiar handwriting, was a short letter explaining the trust in plain terms, that the penthouse could never be sold or transferred without 3 signatures, that this was meant to protect his mother, and that Daniel should never let anyone, including himself, forget that. Daniel had gone very still that evening, his eyes moving over the same lines again and again, saying nothing, while Vivian watched him from across the table with an expression I could not read. He did not remember ever reading it. I watched his jaw work silently, the way it used to when he was a boy trying not to cry in front of me. In the days since, we have talked about it more than once, and to this day, neither of us knows for certain whether he had truly forgotten receiving it, buried somewhere under the weight of everything that came after: a wedding, a business, 2 children, a slow accumulation of ordinary years, or whether some quieter, more ashamed part of him had chosen not to remember it at all, because remembering would have meant refusing Vivian something far sooner than he ever did. Mr. Ackheffer told me one more thing that week, almost as an afterthought, as he was gathering his files back into their folders. Walter had left a second, smaller instruction buried in the original trust paperwork, one Mr. Ackheffer had never mentioned because it had never become relevant until now. If any attempt was ever made to alter or transfer the property without my knowledge, the foundation was required to notify Claire directly, by name, within 30 days. Not Daniel, not a lawyer of the family's choosing. Claire specifically, listed by Walter himself, 11 years before he could have known she would become the daughter who pulled property records and sat across from Mr. Ray's with a folder of her own. Your husband, Mr. Ackheffer said quietly, seemed to trust that if this day ever came, she would be the one to help you see it clearly. I have wondered many times since what Walter knew about our daughter that even I had not fully seen yet. I do not offer you an answer, because I do not have one myself. I only offer you the truth, which is that some family stories do not close as neatly as we wish they would. My son may have known once and forgotten, or he may have known and let himself forget on purpose. I have chosen to love him regardless of which it was, but I will not pretend the question does not still sit with me some nights, quiet and unresolved, long after the folder was finally, safely put away. I still live in the penthouse. Some mornings, I still make 2 cups of tea out of habit before I remember there is only one of me now. I think about Walter often, and about the quiet, patient way he protected me long after his voice had gone silent, not with control, but with a wall he hoped I would never need, built carefully enough to hold even when the people testing it were the ones he loved most. If there is a lesson in this story, I think it is this: fear can make good people do things that look, from the outside, almost unforgivable. That does not mean those things should be forgiven without honesty or without boundaries, but it means the world is rarely as simple as a villain and a victim. Vivian was not a monster. Daniel was not blameless, but he was not cruel either. I was not merely a victim, though I came closer to signing that folder than I ever admitted to anyone but Claire. I have come to believe that protecting what you have built and forgiving the people who tried to take it are 2 entirely separate acts, and you are allowed to do the first without rushing yourself into the second. My home was never really the thing at risk in this story, not underneath everything else. What was truly at risk was whether fear, left unspoken long enough, could quietly convince an entire family that love and honesty were luxuries they could no longer afford. That is the danger I would want anyone listening to this to watch for in their own family, long before it ever reaches a folder on a dinner table. We are, all of us, doing the best we can with the fear we carry. Sometimes that best still causes real harm. Both things can be true at once. I have started in the past year to speak more openly with other women my age about these things, friends from the building, women I meet at the market, even strangers sometimes, when a conversation turns in the right direction. I am always surprised by how many of them carry a version of this same story, quietly, without ever having told it out loud. I tell them what I wish someone had told me before that night at the kitchen table. You are not required to shrink yourself for anyone's comfort, no matter how much you love them, and no matter how real their fear might be. You are allowed to ask for time. You are allowed to bring in your own lawyer, your own advisor, your own trusted voice, even when the people asking you to sign something claim to have your best interests at heart. Especially then, perhaps. Daniel and I talk now, most weeks, about ordinary things, his his work, the children's school projects, small plans for the weekend. The restaurant is still struggling, though Claire checks the numbers with him monthly now, patiently, without judgment, and slowly, month by month, the losses have begun to shrink instead of grow. Occasionally, late at night, when the conversation turns quiet and honest the way conversations sometimes do, he brings up that letter again, unprompted, turning it over in his mind the way I still catch myself doing. "I wish I could tell you for certain that I forgot it, Mom," he said to me once, "but I'm not sure I can promise you that, and I think you deserve better than a comfortable lie." I told him I did not need a comfortable lie. I only needed him as he was, uncertainty and all. Some evenings now, I put on that old record Walter loved, the one we danced to every anniversary for 40 years, and I let myself sway to it alone in the living room, slightly off-key the way he always was, humming the parts I remember best. I think of him writing in that diary, year after year, quietly building something to protect me long before I ever needed protecting. I think of the sentence that stopped my hand that night, the one he said so many times while he was alive that I nearly stopped hearing it. Never make permanent decisions on temporary fear. I understand it differently now than I ever did while he was standing beside me to say it. I have not fully forgiven everyone in this story. I am not certain I ever will, completely, and I have stopped believing that is a failure on my part. Some wounds heal into something workable, something we can live alongside without ever becoming invisible. I have chosen closeness with my family again, imperfect, complicated, still healing closeness. Not because everything was resolved neatly, but because I decided in the end that love does not require a perfect ending to be worth keeping. If you are listening to this, and some piece of your own family sits somewhere inside this story, I will not tell you it ends easily. I will only tell you that you are allowed to protect what you have built, and still choose, afterward, to open the door again. Both things can live in the same heart. Mine still does. Thank you for listening to my story.